And I said, well, actually, we don't have a budget. So how do we live? That's God's problem. Oh, how nice. We have 5 children, and that's God's problem. But on the other hand, my wife's a very spiritual girl, so she said, I've always wanted to experience this. I know we can trust God. I've been reading books on Hudson Taylor, reading books on George Mueller, and if they trusted God and their God still existing, have you heard of George Mueller? Why? How embarrassing. You should have never heard of George Mueller. The reason you've heard about him is because he's famous. And you know why he's famous? Because there's so few of them. If there would have been 1,000 of George Muellers, you would have never heard of George Mueller. Isn't that embarrassing? But there's only one every century. Or maybe there's 2 or 3. And so they become famous. It's time that everybody operate on divine principles. And there needs to be so many of it, nobody can remember your name. And so we read about George Mueller and we learned these lessons and we said if the God of George Mueller did that, then God can still do it today. So we decided to take the chance and experience it for 1 year. We said 1 year won't hurt. By the way, I like to tempt you with the same thing. You ought to try just 1 year. Of course, I know what's going to happen. You'll never be able to leave. Because once you taste it, that's it. It's too much fun. Why would you ever want to leave? Now, you may have to leave to go get some more education. Education is very important, but I would like to suggest to you that education is only for the purpose of carrying out the mission. If you get education to make your life more comfortable, you're off in left field somewhere. You're not even in tune. You belong in some other club. The Advent movement is not about getting an education to make yourself more comfortable. Whose problem is it to take care of your needs? What is your job? To carry out the mission and to take care of it. Jesus said, if you love me, feed my sheep. If you love me, feed my sheep. If you love me, feed my sheep. 3 times to get... By the way, do you all know that you have hard coconuts? Huh? And it's hard to sink in, doesn't it? If you don't believe me, go like this. You'll see how hard your head is? It takes time, over and over. Jesus had to repeat it 3 times to Peter. And when God spoke to Joshua in chapter 1, He told him 3 times, be strong and of good courage. Be strong and very courageous. Have I not told you to be strong and of good courage? 3 times in 1 chapter. Why? Because somehow you have to drive the nail in. It's hard. So this morning, you see, this week, I'm going to be repeating some of these principles over and over to you. So finally they sink in. If you're going to learn these principles, you have to experience them yourself. It is not okay just for Uncle David to tell you about them. You have to experience them for yourself. It doesn't count. The only reason that Uncle David can share these with you and it will help you is because you might get tempted to do them yourself. And if you find out that God is faithful to you, that is your experience that will save you. Not my experience. My experience will save me. But my experience will not save you. But it might encourage you to make the same decision. So we decided to go. My boy said, Daddy, are there snakes there? Yes, there are a lot of snakes. Oh, goody. My girls went, what? My girls didn't care about snakes. What they wanted to, is there any running water? I said, oh yes, there's running water. You run down to the river with 2 buckets and you run back up. So the girls decided to try it out. And of course we went there and for 1 year and we didn't tell anybody what our needs are. We just bought it. I used my last paycheck to charter an airplane. They flew us in 200 miles and dropped us off in a little tiny hole in the jungle. And boom, there we're gone. It was a beautiful part of the world. I was just there the other day. I flew back in there and I just love flying over those mountains and waterfalls and coming right back into that little jungle village. And the soldiers that are posted there, they came out and they didn't know me. They what's your name? And I said, you don't know me? No, we've never seen you before. You're new here, aren't you? Well, we get changed every 3 months. I said, just in case you don't, this is my home. I live here. You live here? Why haven't we seen you? Oh, I've been gone for about a year. I don't live there anymore, but that's my home. I have clothes hanging in the closet. Everywhere I go, I leave clothes hanging in the closet. Sometimes I leave them in hotel rooms and it's hard to find. But but when you get there and you find your pair of pants and a shirt hanging in the closet, don't you feel at home? Huh? And so when I go back to Guyana and I go to that little place, I sleep on my same little bed. When I go to Venezuela, when I go to Bolivia, I have things hanging there. And sometimes on purpose, sometimes I leave them by mistake. But I bond with those places. And we lived there for 6 years. We couldn't leave. The work grew so rapidly that we learned a lesson. And we began to share that with the world. And suddenly I had an experience. What we learned last night is you have to have something to share in order to really do the work. If you don't have anything to share, you're like a messenger that's running, and you get there. You remember the messenger of King David? Absalom was rebelling against David, and all of a sudden he wanted to know how the war was going, and one of the messengers went out running. I'll go. He didn't even know how the war ended. He didn't know anything. He just went running, and he ran so fast, he beat all the other messengers. And when he got there, David said, "What is the news of the war?" And you know what he said? "I saw a great multitude, but I don't know what happened." He had no message. The next one came running up, a little older man, and he told him what happened to his son and told him all kinds of other things. You're a messenger, and you got to have something to share. And I went to Guyana to learn. And what I learned in Guyana, the principles that we're going to learn this week, is what Adventism is all about. It's about having a message to share. It's about knowing Jesus Christ personally, that His promises are real, that He will provide. We learned rapidly what God could do for us. Those are part of the things that we're going to share in a future presentation. And I hope you bring a little pad of paper when you come, because when we start listing all the principles, I want you to write them down. People ask me, "What should I do here? What should I do there?" I can share some principles with you. Those principles have to be applied by you and God. I will not tell you, you should go here, you should go there. Some people say, "I have this kind of money. What should I do with the money?" Excuse me, that's none of my business. Let me share some principles, and you go ask God. A very wealthy man came to me one time. When we talk about infinite resources later on, I want to share some of the stories, but he knew that we were needing some big money for this project overseas, and he wasn't a man that would give us any money. But somehow, I think he and his wife got into an argument together about missionaries or people who always ask for money. And so they knew that I didn't ask for money, but they wanted to tempt me, I think. So they came up to me at a breakfast line. We were standing in line, and he came to me and he said, his wife said, "Brother Gates, we have just sold a property for $2 million. What do you think we should do with the money?" Huh? And they knew that I desperately needed 1.5. They knew that. That was the balance that we had to pay. And I'm sure that I looked at his face and he was going, well, I know what you can do with it. You can give it to me, And that's what he expected. And so I said, "Have you asked the owner yet?" "What do you mean, ask the owner?" "Well, you don't own it. You're just the managers. Have you asked the owner?" And immediately the husband came out of his silent mode and said, "What do you mean, ask the owner?" "Well, God. Ask God what He wants you to do with it." And he said, "How am I supposed to do that?" I said, "Well, through Bible study and prayer, of course." And he said, "God has never told me anything through Bible study and prayer." Excuse me. You mean you've never talked to God through Bible study and prayer? Never. I said, "Forget the money. Let's talk about salvation. You're a lost man." He was in shock. Nobody had ever told this rich guy, because he gave a lot of money to the church, nobody told him he was a lost man because he gave so much money to the church. And I told him, the money is irrelevant. Your soul is at stake. When Jesus comes, He will say, "I never knew you," because you never carried on a conversation with Him. So we sat down at the breakfast table and we spent 2 hours talking about His salvation. People gathered around, to listen. And after we were done, I left. And the next year, his wife saw me at ASI and she said, "Thank you very much. My husband is now a saved man. He now has a living relationship with Jesus Christ." But somebody had to shock him first. And it's about a relationship. If you don't have a relationship, I would like to suggest that you do the same thing I did when I was 17 years old. When I was 17 years old, I made my decision. Now, I didn't understand life. I couldn't have answered all the things. I just knew that I had a temptation in front of me. I was tempted to get involved in something that would have led me astray into a totally different world.